toward the One, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the messenger, the spirit of guidance. So, welcome everyone. This is the fourth in a series of 6 classes on the Gabrielite Work, a relational approach to spirituality. And in each of the classes, we've talked about 2 of what we call the 12 Gabrielite mysteries. Last time we talked about the path is always unfolding and desire. Tonight we're going to be talking about interconnectedness and fractals. And we hope that you'll see as we present these, even though we talk about them one by one, every one of the mysteries is very much related to all of the other mysteries, but we can't talk about 12 things at the same time. But it's really about the whole nature of this work, that everything is in relationship with everything else.
So we'll begin with interconnectedness. This is somewhat like multiple dimensionality, which we have discussed before. But in this case, we're going to talk about how things affect each other, how different realms affect each other, especially how we would have an effect on both the batin, or the turning within, on unmanifest, you would call it, or the subtle realms, and the zahir, or the manifest part of existence, that which is coming into existence. And in the ways of science, just speaking about this, we know that everything is connected in the manifest level and the inner realms. And excuse me for a minute, I have lots of notes. I've enjoyed researching this and talking about this all week long. And I'd like you to say something about the, oh, here we go. Entanglement. Science has shown that entanglement is a non-local effect. So entanglement means that one thing connects with another, and when 2 things are in harmony,
Well, let me explain.
Would you?
So in physics, if you have 2 photons that are entangled, let's say one has an upspin and the other has a downspin, you could separate them at any distance, conceivably to opposite ends of the galaxy. And if you flip the spin on one, the spin on the other would instantly change. It would take no time at all. And so what that means, it's a non-local effect. It's not something that's being transmitted across a physical distance. And physicists have recently verified that not only is entanglement an effect that is non-local in terms of space, it's also non-temporal. It goes across times. And they did an experiment where they entangled 2 photons, and the photons never existed physically at the same point in time. One existed, they destroyed it. Later, they had another photon, and somehow they were able to entangle these across time. So these are pretty mind-boggling discoveries, and it relates to things that we're talking about, that the realm of that our being truly exists in. We do exist across times, we exist across realms, and effects can be present across either of these.
Okay, good. So how does that relate to our work here? Well, we have said before that, first of all, it's possible to relate to the divine, and that was one of the basic conditions, really, of spirituality. And what we were all searching for is that connection with the divine. But not only is there a benefit to us to connect to the divine, but because we are the manifest beings, we can, whatever in relationship with the divine is accomplished, is generalized, is sent, is entangled, because of this entanglement, is connected to all of the parts of existence, both temporal, as we're saying, back in time even, and can be transmitted through to distant places without ever going to distant places. and relate to all the different realms. So there could be changes in the angelic realms from practices that you do yourself. There is an incredible awakening available to you about this kind of connectedness that there is. What would you like to say?
Yes. Well, I would say I think it's an old notion of religion and spirituality, the notion that there's somehow a God separated from existence that is unaffected by what happens in existence. Uh, and in actuality, uh, everything is in a process. It's the nature of life itself to organize to a higher state of being. And it's the nature of even the divine being to continue to evolve to a higher state of wisdom. So if you recall, the Sufis say that creation began because God was a hidden treasure, desiring to be known, desiring to love and be loved, and so on. And the only way that the divine being could fulfill that is through bringing about a creation and existence, but then for there to be a connection between the manifest beings in existence with the divine, such that the divine could experience him herself through each thing in existence in a unique way. And it wouldn't make any sense unless the divine was affected by what happened in existence, but also that the divine participates in the same evolution that we participate in life.
Great. And I feel that one of the most important things when we're speaking about other realms is to have a very firm grounding in your own being. Some of this can be accomplished by well, our walks in nature, our connecting with the world around us. And one of the wonderful ways too is a wazifa that grounds us in the idea of your eternal nature, your divine essence. And it's called Yasamad, Samad, Yasamad. So it's, and I have a wonderful way of discussing this also, in that if we are, as manifest beings, the ones that are in contact with the earth, in contact with all of nature, in contact with the beings in this world, we could think of it as we are manifest and we are connected in many ways to the earth itself. We've an expression I've heard before, actually, with my discussion with my inner divine being, my angel, was to say, you wriggled your toes down into the earth, letting gravity pull you down just right, creating an outside to my innerness, so that we are that connection with the earth that can reach out into all the angelic realms, realms of the qualities, realms of mystery, and all the higher realms. However, we are not going anywhere. We're staying grounded where we are, with our toes wriggled right into that soil and with our gravity pulling us down just right. So we're anchoring ourselves so that we can then reach out into and allow the effects of our work, allow the light of our being, allow the light of others that we contact in our world to be connected back with all these subtle realms. Would you like to add?
Yeah, so in terms of the way that we experience interconnectedness, well, you could say the most basic way would be experiencing ourselves in a dualistic state of consciousness, that we are separated from whoever or whatever that we are perceiving, either in physical reality, but this also would include how we have inner experiences. So we might think of, if we have a experience, let's say, of the angelic realm, well, that's something else. That's not me, and that's someplace else. That's not where I exist. I'm somehow looking up, use an example like putting a periscope up and looking around there, but coming back to my usual separated state of self. And so here's an example of mysteries tying into other mysteries. We've talked about multidimensionality and the fact that we do have our existence in all of the realms. Hazar Inayat Khan says that the human is the only being that exists throughout all the realms that there are. But normally we're not aware of those other realms. So even being able to access them is latent, it's dormant. And our ability to function in those realms also is latent. So the first step is to be able to experience those subtle levels, be able to establish a connection between our manifest self and those subtle levels, and eventually to be able to experience all of those levels as part of the oneness of who we are. So that would be the opposite end of the spectrum from experiencing connectedness from a separated state of consciousness. If we're aware of the fullness of our being, then we can experience that connection as it's like with the fullness of our soul and not just a little part of it. And it also applies to what we bring to the barzakh or meeting place, which we've talked about before.
Right. And I'll mention a little more about the barzakh also, that any of our spiritual work, we say, is done in the barzakh. So what does that mean? We're going somewhere else? No, we are here centered in our being. And it's really a different condition that we're entering when we're thinking of the barzakh. Hopefully it is a linking with that part of ourself, the divine, linking with the manifest, all being part of one being, not any other being. But this being now of mystery that has a connection to the earth and then a connection to everything else, so that whatever the work is that we do, whatever the awakening that we do, is transmitted through all and is also received from all. As I feel like many beings are looking in on our discussion right now and bringing their light to this discussion. So it's a sharing of light also, you could say. It's sharing of this varna, as in the Zoroastrian tradition. So I'd like us to do a practice right now of this grounding in that being and that essence that we are, that everlasting nature. And so the wazifa for that is samad. So I will say it, and again, the visualization for this then is what Azarbash was saying also, is this entire being that we are, a being of light, a being that reaches into all the realms. And so let's say Yasamad. So please, I'll say it for about 3 times and then you join in with me. Ya Samad. Ya Samad. Ya Samad. And join with me now. Ya Samad. Ya Samad. Ya Samad. Ya Samad. And let's pause for a moment. Now, as you continue to do this, you might feel almost like a gong ringing that goes through all the different layers of your being. And it's communicating and it's receiving at the same time, but from this deeply connected place. And let's continue. Ya Samad. 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 And let's pause again. And this time we'll continue to say Ya Samad. But I'd like to also have you envision the light of your being shining out to all the realms, and also receiving the light from all the realms. And this also includes throughout time and all the levels on which we exist. Ya Samad. Ya Samad. Ya Samad. Ya Samad. Ya Samad. Ya Samad. And one more. Ya Samad. I know that there was a practice that you wanted to add.
Yeah, I'll say a little more first, though.
Okay.
So, continuing with interconnectedness, it's said that our being is vaster than the whole universe. And all of our beings are vaster than the whole universe. Well, how does that all fit? Well, it's kind of like the radio and television waves and the waves from internet and cell phone that are broadcast through the air. They're all there, they're all co-present, but they're at different vibrational levels, so they don't bump into each other. And we have a unique part of that, which is us. And every part of us is in connection with every other part of every other thing in existence. So when we're engaged in, let's say, spiritual healing, the most basic level of healing is to think that we're giving some of our physical energy to the other person. And that certainly can be done, but that's not a good idea. Why is that not a good idea? First of all, the effect is going to be limited, it's going to wear off. But secondly, if you're doing that, you're going to deplete your own energy. The other person might temporarily feel better, and you may actually end up getting sick. So there's a different way of doing healing where we feel like we're just allowing healing energy to be available. And so we're opening up that relationship that we have to the divine healing energy that penetrates throughout all of existence. And we're just making that available so that if someone is asked for healing and they're receptive, they can just open to that and it's available for them to receive it. We're not sending something to them. Okay. So I'd like to have us do a little meditation, not about healing, but many of the people that are watching this live or who will watch it later are initiates in the Inayatiyya Sufi order. Other people that may be watching this at a later time aren't, and that's fine. But what I wanted to have us do in this is if you are a part of some spiritual path in which you've received initiation, then you've been linked with the transmission from your particular path, whether it's a Buddhist path or a yogic path or a Sufi path. So what does that mean? What is the transmission? Well, transmission oftentimes is thought of as like the chain of wisdom that has come from all of the beings that have been a part of that tradition throughout the centuries in some cases, and what they've added to the wisdom and the energy that they've put forth. And so the common feeling is, well, we want to try to just tune into that because that's amazing and wonderful. And it certainly is. But that transmission is a living transmission. So what does a living transmission mean? It means it's not a fixed and static thing. It's not just the way it was. If the great being is someone who lived hundreds of years ago or even longer than that, it's not something that was fixed through that being at that particular time. It's an ongoing transmission. And furthermore, and this is the part that doesn't usually get considered, is that to the extent that we have awakened to who we are and our unique potentialities, we're adding something to that transmission. We are a part of that transmission. And the invocation that we said at the start, toward the one, the perfection of love, harmony and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the messenger, the spirit of guidance. It used to be towards who form the embodiment of the master, like somehow it was this fixed thing. But I think it's really beautiful that now it's been changed to the messenger. And I think all of us are a part of what the messenger is as we awaken to our ability to connect and participate with that spiritual unfoldment, that awakening of divinity in life. So let's do a little attunement to the transmission. And if you are a member of the Inayatiyya, then the attunement would be to the transmission as it's been brought forth that we received when we were initiated. If you belong to some other spiritual path, you can tune into that. If you are watching this and you don't belong to any particular spiritual path, but there's some great being, Jesus, Buddha, Moses, Krishna, or so on, that you feel an affinity to, you can just tune into that being, not as the historical being, but Pir Vilayat would say the cosmic aspect of that being as they are now. Okay, so just close your eyes. And this is not done through effort of will. You're just reminding yourself that you have aligned yourself with a particular transmission that comes from many great beings. And you're allowing yourself to just open to being receptive to experiencing that transmission. And it's not a stream of thoughts about, well, I think it's about this or that. Just put aside any preconceptions of what it should be like and just open to experiencing something. Feel that as you're tuning into those beings, that they are tuning into you. They are experiencing you as you experience them. And in addition to receiving the light from those beings, they are receiving a light that can only come through your being. They are being transformed by the light of your being as you are being transformed by the light of their being. This transmission is not affected by physical distance or by time. And to the extent that you're able to open to an awareness of yourself as being a multidimensional being, you can allow yourself to feel this transmission coming through all these other levels on which you exist, like harmonics and overtones of a chord. You feel the blessings that you receive from this transmission, but also the blessings that you give to it, which become available to anyone else who tunes into this transmission now or in the future. Amen. Fractals.
Let's go on to the fractals.
Okay, so should I start?
Mm-hmm.
So you're probably at least somewhat familiar with what a fractal is, or you've certainly seen many examples in nature: a fern plant, a seashell, a sunflower, these beautiful repetitive patterns that we see in nature.
Is there kind of a definition of
Yes,
a
a
fractal?
fractal is something that has a property of what's called self-similarity. So if you look at a fern plant, it has you look at the whole fern, and then you look at a section of it, and each part reproduces what the whole thing looks like. Or if you look at broccoli, the same thing. On a smaller scale, it's just reproducing what was there on the whole scale. And we have fractals throughout our body. The alveoli in our lungs have a fractal pattern.
And the best example are trees and plants outside in nature. You see them all over.
Yes, and a fractal mathematically is generated by a very simple function. The function could be z equals z squared plus some constant, and then you just put that answer back into it, and you do the same thing over and over and over again, and you make a plot out of it. Well, that would be very tedious to do by hand, but now computers do that. And if you Google fractals on YouTube, you'll see these incredibly beautiful videos. There's one called the Julia set and the Mandelbrot set, and it'll show what happens if you, let's say you have a picture of one, but then you magnify it 1,000 times, and then you magnify that 1,000 times, a little piece of it, and so on. Whatever level of magnification you're at, it's going to resemble what the original image looked like, but it'll never be exactly the same. So that's called self-similarity. So nature is full of fractals. Even there's a fractal pattern of the way galaxies are laid out in space. I mean, it's just amazing that regardless of what scale that you're at, there's built-in fractal pattern of nature. So why do we talk about fractals as a mystery in the Gabrielite work? Well, in a fractal, which is a mathematical function, let's say you're doing that thing on the computer, you can keep zooming down 1 billion times, 1 trillion times. You never can reach the end of it, the small end, but you can also zoom out however many times you want. You never can reach the limit of the large end. It's infinite, and you couldn't possibly ever see the whole thing. But you have a very good idea of what the nature of the whole thing is about. I call it exploring your fractal neighborhood. By getting to know a part of it, you have an idea of what the whole thing is about. So a fractal is something static, but in the Gabrielite work, we're talking about a fractal as a pattern of the way that we are in relationship to whatever it is that we are experiencing. It's kind of like the way we branch out in our connections with things in the physical world, things in the inner realm, in the subtle level. And if we could have an image of what that fractal pattern of our being looks like, no two of them would be the same. It's different for each person. We each have a unique, we used to say it was the signature of our soul, or the practice that Ravani Radha Yasamad, that divine essence, which I would describe as it's our divine modality of relationship with whatever we are experiencing. And what are we experiencing? we're experiencing our relationship with other manifestations of the divine, whether it's in physical manifestation, whether it's in subtle realms. And we're also experiencing the nature of our relationship with the divine part of who we are, what even are be called our personal Lord or our personal angel.
I wanted to mention that I was always wondering why nature seems to be so good for everybody. You know, it's almost, you certainly don't have to be on a spiritual path, and it's good for kids, and it's good for adults, and there might be many, many reasons for it. But when I heard about fractals, I started to think about all of the patterns that are available in nature that are fractal patterns. Uh, and you might try this on for size and see what you think. I think it could be that there's a tuning that happens between ourselves and nature, uh, in the idea that we're often stuck at a certain level, uh, and we don't realize that there's many nested levels within where we are, and outwards from where we are, you might say, um, and that nature is telling us, don't stay stuck. You can release yourself from where you are. Uh, and it says it to us as we're looking at the tree and we see the little tiny twigs on the tree, and then even smaller designs on the tree uh, that are calling out to us in a way that, you know, a language that we never had to learn. So see what you think about that way, that fractals might be affecting all of us.
Okay, so let's put together some things we've been talking about. We are in deep interconnectedness with everything that exists in every realm. Each of us has a unique way of relationship with everything that we are connected with, a unique way of experiencing that. And if we want to tune into another being, so to speak, well, one way to do it is to imagine that we're here and we're sending our consciousness out someplace to where that being is. Like, let's say you want to tune into a person that you love, but they're not physically present. Well, one way to do that is you can imagine that you're zooping your consciousness out to where they live and you're tuning into them. And that's fine. That's one way that you could do it. But a much easier way to do it is to realize that if we are truly interconnected with everything else, then we can find that being within our own being, within that fractal pattern of relationship of our own being. We can find that place, in quotes, because it's not a physical place, where we are in relationship with that being, and we can open to that as a way of experiencing them. Well, that's great. But even more wonderful and amazing than that is this works across time too. We can attune to a being who's no longer physically present here, who lived in the past. We can attune to get a being who is in a subtler realm of existence. And again, the first way of doing that is to imagine we're sending our consciousness up somewhere where they are. But the other way is to find them within our own self.
Within your heart, I like
Yes,
to think of
yeah,
it.
within your heart. And again, the mystics say that our heart is vaster than the universe. So this is a very kind of paradoxical way of thinking. Well, wait a minute here. I'm just so big. My heart can't be. But they're talking about our spiritual essence of our being. Our consciousness has become, Pir Vilayat would say, sclerosed. That was one of his favorite words. I mean, just really knotted down and constricted into a very limited perspective. And when we can open up to the vastness of who we are, then we can find any being within ourselves. We don't have to send out somewhere to do that. We can experience the blossoming forth of a divine quality that seems to just permeate our whole being, rather than thinking that it's coming down from someplace else, or even thinking that, well, we have the seeds of that. That's our divine inheritance, and we're going to germinate those. And that's true. I mean, we have to work with them to bring them forth. But another way of thinking about it is that that's all part of the reality of who we are. We just have to open to that particular way of relationship that takes place through fill in the blank, beauty, compassion, truth, mastery, or so on. And now we can experience this circulation that takes place by means of that quality. And even the word circulation, we think of as it's here, now it's coming back here. It's not like that. It's all the places at once. And I can't make my hands do that, but maybe you can kind of get the idea of that. It's suffusing everything, and every part is affecting every other part. The manifest and the transcendent, or ourselves and whoever or whatever we are in relationship and physical existence.
And I'll continue talking about that, but in a tiny bit different way. I feel it in terms of ishq. Ishq meaning that desire, that that wanting. It's really like the step before creating also, that we need to be producing this. We need to bring this forth. And you're feeling that on, when you're speaking about it, I was feeling it very deeply. But what I know also is that when we're feeling that, it's being felt on the other side also. And what does that mean? Well, that the divine is also feeling. So often we're not sure where the if it started on this side or the other side, whether there was a message that was sent through to us to bring into existence, or whether we're starting it on this side and asking for help from the other side. And there's not only one other side. We're speaking of, many possibilities, maybe even reaching to the past, maybe reaching into the future. And ishq, that desire, that pull, that precursor to creation, is the power that moves the universe. So that's coming forth in everything you're talking about.
Yeah, and along with that, there's a beautiful idea in Buddhism. It's called mutual or dependent co-arising, where nothing is the cause of something else, or everything is the cause of everything else. Things arise together. So I thought of kind of a trivial example, but I think it's a good illustration. So I've learned that if someone doesn't get enough fat in their diet, so sometimes when people are trying to lose weight, they go, I'm just going to cut out all the fats. Well, what can happen is your joints start aching. Your joints need some fat to function properly. So let's say this is happening, but you don't realize what the cause is. You might get a craving for peanut butter. So you have some peanut butter. I want some peanut butter. It's the thought in your mind, but really that ish is coming from the joints in your body, and they don't know how to send an instant message in words to your brain, but they're sending out the chemical signal, hey, help, I need some fat to function properly. And then that gets translated in your brain. You think, well, I'm desiring some fat in the form of peanut butter, but really you're responding to a desire from your joint, but you don't realize it. You think it's coming from you. So we think, I remember in yoga, they would say that if you have, well, not just yoga, yeah, I guess that's the first place I heard it. If you have a desire for God, it's only because God has a thousandfold desire for you, that you couldn't just have it from your side. So it's always happening from both sides. And even Arby talks about this over and over again, that neither the human or the divine side has a meaningfulness or even an existence without the other. That in a sense, each one is the creator of the other. Whoa, what do you mean? We're the creator of the divine being? It's a lot easier to think, well, the divine is the creator of us. But against this idea of this mutual co-arising, where did the desire in the divine being come from to want to be known? Something brought that desire forth. We're going to be talking about in a later series of mysteries about the Sophianic function. And those of you who were in previous classes, we talked some about this, is this eliciting light that pulls forth a desire. So desire is happening from a lot of different angles, and usually we're just focused on one side of it.
So what I want to say is that we're speaking in many ways about what we can call a Sophianic function, but it's also called the imaginal faculty, and what some of us have been studying together. So it is your imagination has been challenged many ways already in this hour, thinking of things in a very different way than you may have ever thought about them before. You might listen to the whole thing again, I would suggest, and write down what is a new way of looking at things. Number one, the second way of looking at things, challenging your imagination to be able to think wider, think deeper, think more all-inclusively, think coming from two different sides. So there's some that you could begin with. And this is a beautiful gift that we have been given, this imagination, and it can be worked at with many different things. And then also you'll hear other things as you go around your week, your life, and you'll think about, well, that's a different way of looking at things I've never thought of before. And you can add that to your imaginal faculty.
And I thought of what might be a good theme song for what we're talking about, and maybe many of you are familiar with it. I think Judy Collins may have done it originally. It's called Both Sides Now. I've looked at life from both sides now. It's a beautiful song, but that's really what this is all about. And Pir Vilayat would call it toggling. You've heard us describe this before. At first, you're toggling. You're going from one vantage point to another and back and forth and back and forth. But at a certain point, you get it and it clicks in, and you discover, perhaps to your amazement, you can experience both sides at the same time in full relationship with each other and evolving and affecting each other simultaneously. And that's a wonderful breakthrough when that happens. But that's really our deep hope in these classes that we're doing, that you'll discover a way not only of working with practices from that perspective, but to experience life from that perspective. Terms we've used to describe that as being in a state of harmonic relationship or relational unity with what you're experiencing, instead of that separated state of consciousness, and to be able to really experience that light that comes from whatever it is that you're in relationship with, but also the light that comes from you, and the effects of those two lights upon each other. And that takes place with everything that you're doing. We're not aware of it. There have been experiments that show that, especially in experienced meditators, that photons are emitted from their eyes. In fact, enough photons were emitted to where they could activate a photoelectric cell to turn on a little light bulb, just from the light that was coming from their being in meditation. Light comes from the cells of our body when that happens. It's not just the light we're used to thinking about, but it's a frequency of light that's different from the one that we're used to perceiving. So the world is a much more wonderful place than we think it is. And it could be as wonderful as we can imagine, in the sense of what Ravani Ra was talking about, that capacity of our soul, that we call it the creative faculty of the soul of creative imagination. So should I do the practice?
Yeah.
So I'd like to do a little fractal meditation now. So close your eyes and think about some stuck pattern that has been present perhaps for a long time in your life. It could be something that gets you caught up in particular circumstances or with particular kinds of people, that pulls you away from a feeling of being centered and connected. It just pulls you back into old patterns, and afterwards you go, oh God, I got caught up in that same old stuff again, and so on. So just pick something like that. And imagine now if you could see a living fractal uh, image of your existence, which would not just be in this particular point in time, but would incorporate the past in your life. And remember that we're talking about the fractal as your way of relating to whatever it is that you're experiencing, whoever and whatever. So imagine now that the situation that you, or pattern that you've chosen as you look in the fractal of your being, maybe going across different times into the past, different locations in your life and so on, that they're depicted as knots. Like there's energy flowing throughout this fractal of your being, light is circulating, but it's in certain places, and these are repeated at different scales in your being. It's blocked. There's a knot there, and this knot is how you've been caught up in whatever that particular circumstance is. So see if you can just imagine that. And now ask yourself, like Pir Vilayat would often have us do this, what quality am I being challenged in this particular pattern or circumstance? It could be patience, it could be compassion, it could be mastery, it could be truthfulness. What quality, if I really was fully able to express this quality, it would really transform this situation, this pattern. Even if at first you think, well, I don't really have much of that, or I don't have any of that, but just, that's okay. Just ask yourself, well, what is it? Identify what's needed. And now remind yourself that each of us has been endowed with our unique divine inheritance, which contains actually all of the different divine qualities, but each of us has a unique way of expressing them. It's just like many artists might use the same kinds of paint, but their paintings are recognizable, they're very distinct. It's what the artist does with those paints. It's what we do, how we relate through those qualities. And so the quality that you feel like you're in need of, even if you didn't think you had much of it, no, it's actually there. You just haven't allowed yourself to access it. So now just set a gentle intention. I would like to avail myself to this quality, which is part of my divine inheritance. And it's like the seed was there, but you really hadn't nurtured it. So imagine now that it's been nurtured and nourished and provided with what is needed. So now it blossoms forth in you. And now it becomes something available and very present in these stuck situations. And see yourself actuating these, whatever that quality is. And as you do that, imagine that this knot that's the physical representation of this stuck place that perhaps is repeated many times in your life, this knot is gradually loosening and untying and unknotting and opening and opening and opens fully. So now there's no blockage there. Now there's this energy circulating freely through all the levels where it was blocked before, this light circulating freely through all of these levels. And feel this deep transformation that has taken place in your being. From one way of looking at this, it would be, well, this was all karma from the past, or yoga, they talk about samskaras and you burn your karma, burn your samskaras. Well, that's one way of looking at it. This is another way. This is allowing yourself to open to the divine remedy that you've always had within you, and now you're free from this pattern. It's no longer a part of you. You no longer can get caught up in it anymore. And your way of freeing yourself from this is not only brought a relief to you and an opening of circulation, but because every other being in every level of existence is interconnected with you, you have made available now a wisdom that other beings can use who may need to free themselves from a similar kind of pattern. So if you can imagine the giant fractal of everything, God's fractal, you've unknotted a knot and you've opened up something that becomes available to all beings. You've given a gift. Amen. Stop here.
Oh, I wanted to react about this exercise and also to mention that when we have a difficulty like this and we see it in kind of such a visual way and a kind of process way, this beautiful fractal, it kind of makes us think about that there's certainly purposefulness in the knots, in the difficulties, when it can lead to us using this activity or this meditation. I could see myself using this many times to work with things in my life, and to think about it in terms of, wow, I know why I have this in my life right now.
And I just thought of a take on a familiar saying, don't judge another person until you've walked a mile in their fractal. But your point is well taken. I mean, by our, if I think I've told this story before, but there's a story about a sannyasi, a renunciate in India, and all he had was a change of loincloth and a begging bowl. And he lived in a cave, and one morning he came out and someone had stolen his begging bowl, and he just went into a rage. How could they do this? I'm a holy man. I've renounced everything. And then he realized, who am I kidding? Here I am sitting here and meditating all the time, and I'm getting so upset about some material object. And then he gave up his life as a sannyasi and went to live in the city. And it's said with good reason that it's much harder to be in yoga, a householder yogi than a monk, because a householder yogi, you're having to deal with all the hustle and bustle of day-to-day things. And we're tested. I mean, we're all tested by what's going on in the world right now. And when we can find a way to walk on water, what does that mean? Not literally walk on water, but where we can be in a place where we can maintain an equanimity of being, where we can maintain, Hosmer kind of this beautiful term, he called it the smiling forehead, that there's an inner, it's all okay. That doesn't mean external circumstances are okay and you're not working to change them, but there's this inner sense that, like that, those words, all is well and all will be well, and the very deep meaning of that, that this, we're participating in the unfolding story of the divine, and it's always going to have very rough edges. And if it didn't, there couldn't be any change. If it was all just beautiful, idyllic paradise, well, I don't know about you, but after about 100,000 years, I think I would get bored to tears. I might want to go someplace else. I mean, that it is the, we're at the front lines.
Or the ragged edges.
Yeah,
people like
but
us to say.
the front lines of the divine awakening in existence, and the furtherance of that awakening, which never ends. And we chose to do that. We are pioneers. We didn't stop in the descent of the soul and higher realms, which many souls did. I mean, they said that I'm quite happy here, but we chose to keep going. And here we are. And our purpose here is much more than what we may have thought of when we began our spiritual journey. Well, I'm going to become enlightened. I'm going to become awakened. At some point, you realize, well, that really isn't what it's all about at all. I am a part of the divine being awakening to itself and its capacities in existence. And I have the amazing blessing of participating with every other name and form of the divine being in existence to wake up to itself. And so we're not going around going, they might lock you, you're a divine being, we're just being who we are. But that being who we are, then it's going to be natural that light is going to come from us, and we're going to be able to establish connections with other people where light comes from them, and something will be triggered in that. It's a catalyst. I have a plant.
I was going to bring your plant in there.
Oh,
You want me to do it?
I think it's sleeping. But
Oh, okay.
But anyway, I have this beautiful, I think it's a Hawaiian plant. And when I got it, it wasn't in great shape. And you were thinking, well, it's, too bad.
Well, I tell you, it was $25 for this little tiny plant. And I thought that was a bit much, and it didn't look so good at all.
But I just love this plant. I nurtured it.
I'm going to bring it in.
Okay, genuinely appreciated it. And you'll see in just a minute, Ravani Ra's gone to get it. It's beautiful. I mean, it's just blossoming out all over it. And you can tell it's a very happy plant. And I think it's going to have a long and healthy plant life. So it'll be here in just a moment.
You want to hold it?
Here. And can you see the flower?
You might know what it's called. We don't know,
But you can see this plant is just
beautiful.
bustling with life, and is happy to meet all of you. And we'll now go back to bed because they're sleeping.
Okay. I'll put it back to bed.
So,
That's all.
okay. So we will stop here.